Right, today I want to have a bit of a chat about tight or slack lines. It's an age-old argument. I think most of it is down to personal preference. For me, it's all about slack lines whenever I can. Certain situations I can't. But yeah, I'm going to have a chat about it and see, maybe try and explain a little bit why I'm sort of obsessed with it. And I sort of say to people when they come here, it's much better to fish a slack line where you can. We'll run through some of the pros and cons of both tight and slack lines, and quickly show you how to set it up properly if you're fishing a slack line, because there is a bit of a process to get it done right. So yeah, we'll start running through it and make your own minds up. So there's a few things to consider when you're deciding whether to fish tight line or slack line. First one being the profile of the lake. So where you're fishing compared to where your spot is, where you're fishing from, where your swim is compared to where your spot is. So this lake's a good example because on the house side, the lake dips down and then it comes up. So as soon as you come past the main gravel bars is where it slowly starts to come up. It's on a nice gentle slope. If you're fishing from the house side, you need to contend with the drop and where it comes back up to the gravel bar. And you need to think about your line in that respect. So if you've got a tight line, or if you've got a back lead on and you're still fishing a tight line, for that whole section of the lake in the bowl before it comes back up, you've got a line running like a laser beam right through the middle of that area of the lake. Now on the far bank where I'm sat now, I'm sat in Mazes at the moment, it's a gradual slope down to halfway out in the lake, down to all the gravel bars and all that. It's a gradual slope down, so you're going to get a much better line lay this side of the lake. Whether you're fishing a tight line or a slack line, you're going to get better line lay from this side. Now there's ways to get around it if you're fishing on the far side, and that's fishing a slack line, that's fishing a flying back lead and a back lead at your rod tip. But when you put the back lead on at your rod tip, you want to slide it as far as you can out into the lake. So gently put it on the end of your line and fish a heavier lead, like a 4 ounce lead, something like that, and that'll enable you to use the rod tip to hold it nice and high and slide the back lead further out without you moving your rig. So it's doable. We fish quite often from house bank, and I always fish with back leads and flying back leads. So yeah, that's lake profile. Right, so next thing that you need to consider is your lead setup. So if you're fishing a lead clip, you're fishing an inline, or you're on a heli setup, you need to fish a heli setup, for example, a little bit tighter than you would a slack line. So for me, if you want to fish a slack line, the best thing to go for is a semi-fixed lead clip or a semi-fixed inline. One of the disadvantages of a slack line is bite indication when you get a fish coming towards you, so you get a backdrop, right? So yes, it can be a worry, but if you're fishing a running rig or a semi-fixed rig, your lead, whichever direction the fish runs, a good heavy lead like a size 4, I use size 4s, is going to create a pivot point for your line. So it doesn't really matter which way the fish runs, your lead will stay where it is. So even if it picks it up and runs towards you, which would normally give you an indication of a drop back at the bobbin side, it's kind of still doing the same thing because it's all pivoting around that good sized lead. So you'll still get an indication. You won't get a drop back, but you'll get an indication at your bite alignment, the rod side. So that's something not really to worry about, as long as you fish, like I said, a running rig or a semi-fixed rig, something like that. For me in here, I do prefer a semi-fixed lead just because this is another thing that you need to bear in mind, is what hooks you're using. So ultra sharp hook, you can fish obviously a fair bit slacker, but I'll fish a semi-fixed rig, so the swivels are just about into the leg clip, or if they are right inside it, they're in there fairly loose, so it's just enough to set the hook and then it becomes completely free running. Fish can't use the lead to shake the hook out, and you get good bite indication up at your bite alarms. We use microbarbed hooks in here, so once the hook's in, once the lead's done its job and it's got the hook in, we're golden from there onwards. We don't need to worry about using the clutch to set the hook, or keeping the line tight to make sure the barbless hook doesn't come out. So yeah, microbarbed hooks are a lot easier in that respect for fishing a slack line. Any hook that you use, get it as sharp as you can. I used to hand sharpen all my hooks. I don't so much now. We're using the snide tackle hooks, so they're pretty good out the packet. I used to be absolutely paranoid about hook sharpness, but since we started using them, it's been all right. I haven't had to worry. Very sharp to hook a fish, and not needle point sharp, so that every time you wind it in, you need to change the hook. So kind of a good all-rounder, I suppose, in that respect. What else you need to consider if you're going to fish backleads? You're going to fish flying backleads, as I said already. I will try and fish both wherever possible. The rod and the setup I'm going to show you today doesn't have a flying backlead on, but I have got a backlead, so yeah, just for a bit of an example later on. Another thing you need to consider is your hooks. You can get obviously hand sharpened ultra sharp hooks, which if you're fishing for pressured fish, I would always recommend. Microbarbed is our rule on here. If you're fishing somewhere that's a barbless rule, I'd be more inclined to fish a semi-slack line, just so that when you do get a run, there's tension on that barbless hook right from the start. You can still fish a slack enough line that it won't spook the fish, so that's not an issue too much. Then you need to kind of make a decision if you're going to use backleads or not. I use both usually. I try and fish a flying backlead and a normal backlead at the rod tip, so I'm just so paranoid about having everything pinned down. As I said, pressured fish, ultra sharp hooks, line pinned down, slack line. This is just for me. I don't like to sit behind the rod and be paranoid that the fish is swimming into the line and they're spooking off. They're very, very clever. They'll bump into weed all the time, they'll bump into branches all the time, and they won't care. But as soon as they bump into a line, they know the difference, and they will just bugger off to another area of the lake. So in my mind, everything needs to be pinned down. But as I said, it's personal preference. I'm just trying to explain why I'm so obsessed with slack lines. Wind is another issue. So if you want to fish a slack line and it's really windy, it's a lot harder than fishing with a tight line. To be honest, on here, if there's a strong wind, I will fish a tight line. If you fish a slack line in wind, it's going to end up tight anyway, because it's just going to be bowed out into the lake, so it's going to end up tight no matter what you do. So it might as well end up being tight down to the lead, and you get that better bite indication for it. But yeah, also what you need to bear in mind for those that do a bit more all-round fishing is the weight of your line. Now there's lines that you can get, obviously, like Contour and Sublime and that kind of stuff, that are heavy lines. So if you are planning on fishing with slack rods, find the heaviest line that you can, just because it makes it easier. So it might not seem like much, but if you've got a heavy line, if you're fishing somewhere where it's smaller fish and you've only got 12-pound line on, or 15-pound line, it's not going to sink as easily as a heavier line would. So if you can get one of these ones that sinks really well, it means you've got less line in the water out to the lead because it's sinking already. And what tends to happen is it might not sound like much, but the pressure from the water will hold that line down. Any line that you put in, the pressure from the water will hold it down if it's slack enough. And depending on how far you're fishing out, depends on how much accumulated pressure you've got on that line. So if you've got a super sharp hook and a good sized lead, with that water pressure holding the line down, that is more than enough to set a hook. So in terms of having your clutch tight to set the hook, it's not needed if you've got the right setup, which is ultra sharp hooks, good lead, semi-fixed, enough to set the hook, and slack lines are much more of a benefit in that scenario. So the problem with a tight line, especially if you're fishing 3 rods or even 4 rods, if you come on holiday, me and Rox, we fish from the same swim, so that's 5 rods, you know, in one double swim. So it's quite a lot of lines in the water, and it's not usually too much of an issue. But for example, our fish, when you hook them, most of them run straight at you, and they do all the fighting under the rod tip. Now, if you've got other rods in the water with tight lines, even if you've got back leads on, the chances of that fish wiping out your rods are a lot higher than if you've got back leads on and a slack line. So we tend to do that, especially when we're catfishing, because the cats are very clever, and I'm sure they do it just to wind us up, but they will wipe out every single rod you've got. And I'm not even making that up. Every time we've hooked one, it's wiped out all the other rods. So you're not going to get, I'm not going to say that it's going to be 100%, but the chances of getting wiped out are a lot less if you fish back leads and slack lines. One thing that I would recommend trying to everyone is a semi-fixed lead, as we said, or a running rig in open water. And a lot of people, me included, I used to fish tight lines in open water, and I really shouldn't have done it. If you think if you've got a tight line out to mid-water, you're almost cutting yourself off by having tight lines out to the spot. So definitely try slack lines in open water, and see how you get on. If it makes a difference, please let me know. Just write something in the comments, and let me know how you're getting on with that, because it'd be interesting for me to see if it's just me here, or if it's everywhere that it kind of makes a difference. So yeah, let me know. All right, so how I set it up, I've got my line in the clip, as I do whenever I'm casting out to a spot. If I'm using my bait boat, I still put the line in the clip so I know I'm getting the right distance. Cars going past, so I know I'm getting the right distance. I want the line to hit the clip if I'm using the bait boat as well. And one thing to bear in mind, if you are using a bait boat, have your bail arm open when you're sending it out, and just feed line off with your finger. If you do it on the clutch, you'll end up with a load of twists in your line, which is the last thing you want. Bait boats are terrible for causing twists in your line. So I'm just going to gently sling it out. It's not going very far, and let it hit the clip. Nice and short. Donk. Feel the lead go down. So all I'm doing now to sink the line, I'm standing right over where the bite alarm is, where this rod's going to go, and I'm not using the tip of the rod to sink the line, I'm using my hand. You get a lot more feel for when you're in contact with the lead with your fingers than you do with the rod tip. So that's in contact with the lead at the moment. I'm just going to lower the rod gently, and then I'll pull the line so I can see in the water, the line coming tight. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold it there for a few seconds, because there's any bow in the line or anything like that, it still needs time to come round. So once I think it's done and it's fine, I'll slacken off my fingers completely, and then it's time to put the back lead on. So shoving the back lead on, I've opened the bail arm. I'm just going to move the rod backwards and clip it on. Don't want to do it by pulling it off the clutch. Same reason for driving out with a bait boat or anything like that. I don't want to cause any twists in the line. So it's slack from my arm side, from the rod side, and I'm putting it a little bit tight from the lake side, from the rig side. Then all I'm going to do is take this, I'm not going to throw it, but I'm going to let it slide out nice and gently. I'll try and get it as far as I can, and if it's not gone far enough, I'll use the rod to get it even further out. For this swim, the way that the bank is, that back lead hasn't gone quite far enough out. Now this is where the beauty of having a heavy lead comes into play. I've got 4 ounce lead on, and it's only a 1 ounce back lead. So what I can do is tighten down just ever so slightly, and I can lift it with the rod tip, and you'll see it slide a lot further out. Just makes it clear, and you can feel it down when you take the rod down. Makes it completely pinned on the bottom of the slope. So, okay, so the next stage, now we've got our back lead in, we're going to set the rod down. Line's nice and slack still, we're still focusing on not moving the lead. So in the bite alarm it goes, and the backrest still nice and slack. The bite alarm is turned off, and I'm going to clip my bobbin on. Now clip the bobbin on first, it stops you from pulling the line too tight. So the bobbin's on first, bite alarm's turned off. Don't be the guy that has your bite alarm on when you're winding your reel in all the time. And then what I'm going to do, put the bait runner on, and I'm going to tighten my line down, and I'll keep tightening it down till the bobbin just comes off the bottom. Once I've done that, I'll give it a few seconds, 10-20 seconds, something like that, and then I'll slowly now let line out until the line is nice and slack. You do have to kind of feed it through the bite alarm, and it's nice and slack. Now, depending on how far out you're fishing will depend on how much time it's going to take for the line to sink. So I'm only fishing a short distance out here just for demonstration purposes, but so I've pulled the line out, and that's pretty much how I want it anyway. Obviously further out you are, it might take 5 minutes, might take 10, might even take 15 minutes. The thing to do is just pull a bit of line out, just 1 foot at a time. Once it goes tight again, 1 foot at a time, and just keep doing that until it stops pulling itself up tight. And then you know everything's completely pinned down. So this is how it should look. I'll show you just quickly now. This is how I like to have my line, nice and slack like that, and that will still give you a very good bite indication. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into why I like to fish slack lines. Like I said, it is personal preference. There's benefits to both. There's pros and cons for each one, and certain situations where you've only got one choice. But if I can, I'll always fish a slack line. That's it pretty much for this video. Just a little one, short one on tight lines and slack lines.